In the closing scenes of Game of Thrones, while King's Landing's ruins still smoldered under a crimson sky, a shattered realm made its final choice. Tyrion Lannister, exhausted and defeated, gazed across the dragon pit toward the crippled boy who survived a deadly fall years ago. "Do you want to be king?" Tyrion asked. Bran Stark answered immediately, "Why do you think I came all this way?" That single response fractured the fanbase like lightning through ice. Had Bran, the silent, passive boy who insisted he wanted nothing, just admitted he'd foreseen, maybe even orchestrated everything? Or was this simply fate revealing itself, the natural conclusion for someone who'd witnessed every potential outcome? No ruler in Westeros history ever claimed the throne with such unsettling composure, such complete lack of conflict, no battles to win, no enemies to eliminate, just silence, perfect timing, and forbidden knowledge. But beneath that silence lurks the show's greatest puzzle. Did Bran the Broken triumph in the Game of Thrones, or had the game always belonged to him from the start? So here's where things get tricky. Seeing what's coming is fundamentally different from engineering events to make something happen. So which category does Bran fall into? Is he a passive observer who simply accepts his destiny, or is he an active participant shaping events to ensure a specific outcome? Despite his claims about no longer having desires, Bran absolutely still wants things. The evidence is right there throughout the later seasons if you know where to look. He saw Daeron Targaryen's wheelchair design in his visions, and specifically requested one be made for him. That's a desire. That's a want. And he didn't need that particular design for functional purposes. Any wheelchair would have served his physical needs, but he wanted that specific one because he'd seen it in his visions, and he made sure he got it. And clearly, he wanted the throne. Otherwise, why make that long journey south if he knew the offer was coming and planned to refuse it? Think about the logistics of this for a moment. Bran can't walk. Traveling from Winterfell to King's Landing, even in a wheelchair, would have been an incredibly difficult and uncomfortable journey. He would have needed to be carried at times, transported carefully over rough terrain. If he truly had no interest in becoming king, if he genuinely wanted nothing, he could have simply declined or stayed in Winterfell. He could have sent a raven saying thanks, but no thanks. But he didn't do that. He made the journey, he showed up, and when the offer came, he was ready to accept it. The truth is that Bran's concept of wanting has merged with his understandings of destiny. Because he's witnessed future events through his green seer abilities, he doesn't frame his desires as personal wishes anymore. Instead, he sees them as necessary steps to fulfill what he knows must occur. In his mind, there's no difference between wanting something and knowing something must happen. They've become the same thing. This is a crucial distinction that helps us understand every choice he makes from the moment he becomes the Three-Eyed Raven. Bran Stark is dead. Long live the Three-Eyed Raven. We need to constantly remind ourselves of what Bran has repeatedly told us. Brandon Stark no longer exists in any meaningful way. He's become the Three-Eyed Raven, a living embodiment of the Weirwood network, containing millennia of Westerosi memories and experiences. This isn't metaphorical. This isn't him being dramatic or philosophical. Bran, as he was, is genuinely gone. Think about how different he became after emerging from Bloodraven's cave. The warm, curious boy who loved to climb, who wanted to be a knight, who cared deeply about his family's approval. That person vanished. What emerged was something else entirely. Something ancient and alien wearing Bran's face. His family noticed it. Sansa and Arya both commented on how strange and distant he'd become. Mira Reed, who had sacrificed everything to get him to safety, was heartbroken when she realized the boy she'd protected no longer existed. In the source material, green seers who tap into the Weirwood network experience time in a radically different way than ordinary humans. As the books explain it through Bloodraven's words, time is different for a tree than a man. We here, for men, time is a river. We are trapped in its flow, hurling from past to present, always in the same direction. The lives of trees are different. They root and grow and die in one place, and that river does not move them. The oak is the acorn is the oak. This isn't just poetic language, it's describing a fundamentally different way of experiencing reality. When Bran plugs into the Weirwood network, he's not just seeing the past and future like watching a movie. He's experiencing time as a single unified whole. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously for him. The distinction between what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen becomes meaningless. This is why his behavior seems so strange and inhumane. He's not operating with the same temporal framework as everyone else. When he looks at you, he's simultaneously seeing you as you are, as you were, and as you will be. When he makes a decision, he's already seen its consequences. This gives him an almost unfair advantage in any political situation, but it also means he's lost something fundamental about being human: the ability to experience genuine surprise, genuine uncertainty, genuine hope about the future. Now let's talk about the paradox of predetermined action. This is where it gets wonderfully mind-bending. Bran isn't actually manipulating the timeline to alter future events. Rather, he's executing present-day actions necessary to ensure the future unfolds exactly as it was always destined to. This sounds like a contradiction, but it's actually the key to understanding everything he does. Think back to Season 6 and the Hodor revelation, one of the most heartbreaking and philosophically complex moments in the entire series. When Bran reached into the past towards Willis during that desperate moment, making him hold the door, he wasn't changing anything. He was simply doing what he had always been fated to do. From Bran's perspective, Hodor was never anything but Hodor, the gentle giant capable of only saying his own name. Because Bran was always going to create that temporal loop, Willis became Hodor because of Bran's intervention, and that intervention was always going to happen. Bran never had a choice in the matter, even though it appeared he did in that moment. This is the paradox at the heart of Bran's power. He can see what will happen, but what he sees happening includes his own actions to make it happen. He cannot choose to do something different because what he sees is already accounting for his choices. Free will and destiny become the same thing. Game of Thrones operates on a closed-loop timeline, which is different from many other fantasy stories that feature time travel or prophecy. In a closed-loop timeline, you cannot change the future, because any action you take to change it was already a part of how that future came to be. It's a snake eating its own tail. The ink is dry, as Bloodraven said. The timeline is already written, and everyone, including Bran, is just acting out their parts. What will happen has already happened, in a sense. The Weirwood Network, and by extension Bran, knows what was always meant to be. Bran's role is simply to play his part, to execute the actions that he'd already seen himself taken. As Bloodraven ominously put it, the ink is dry. But here's the disturbing question this raises. If Bran knows what will happen and knows he'll do certain things to make it happen, does he bear moral responsibility for those actions if he allows something terrible to occur because he knows it must occur? Is he still culpable? Can we judge someone for following a script they've already read, even if that script involves the death of thousands? Keep that question in mind as we examine what Bran actually did. Orchestrating the Endgame. So what specific moves has Bran made to ensure his predetermined future comes to pass? Let's trace the thread of his interventions, starting with the most obvious threat to the realm. Throughout the final seasons, his primary focus appeared to be the Night King and the Army of the Dead. This makes sense. You can't become king if the entire world has been overrun by ice zombies, but Bran's approach to this threat reveals his strategic thinking. He witnessed the Night King's creation in one of his visions. A dragonglass dagger plunged through a human's heart before a weirwood tree, transforming him into the first White Walker. This wasn't just a historical curiosity for Bran, it was a blueprint. If you understand how something was created, you can understand how to destroy it. The method of creation suggested the method of destruction. Valyrian steel through the heart before a weirwood tree. Then he carefully arranged the pieces to make this happen. His first move after acquiring the Cat's Paw dagger, that infamous blade that had been used in an assassination attempt on him back in season 1, was handing it directly to Arya. Not Sansa, not Jon, not any of the trained warriors at Winterfell, Arya. Why? Because he'd seen what was coming. He knew she would be the one to deliver the killing blow. The weapon needed to be in her hands. Then he positioned himself before the weirwood tree in Winterfell's Godswood, making himself bait. He knew the Night King would come for him. The three-eyed raven represented everything the Night King wanted to destroy. Bran was the living memory of the world, and the Night King wanted to bring an eternal night of forgetting. And when he needed just a few extra seconds for Arya to arrive, he told Theon something crucial. "You're a good man." Think about the weight of those words. Theon had spent years being broken and tortured, believing himself to be something less than human. He'd betrayed the Starks, lost his identity, and was desperately seeking redemption. Those 4 words from Bran, the person he'd grown up with, the person he'd failed to protect years ago, gave Theon the validation and confidence he needed to make one final heroic stand. That validation gave Theon the courage to charge the Night King, buying those precious final moments before Arya struck. Without those seconds, the Night King might have killed Bran. Without that kill, the Army of the Dead would have continued. Without Bran's perfectly timed words to Theon, none of it would have worked. This is Bran's method. Small interventions at crucial moments, each one perfectly calibrated to produce a specific result. He doesn't need to do much. He just needs to say the right thing at the right time. Jon's Parentage. But defeating the Night King was only half the battle. The Army of the Dead might have been the most immediate existential threat, but they weren't the obstacle to Bran's kingship. The Army of the Dead might have been the most immediate existential threat, but they weren't the obstacle to Bran's kingship. That obstacle was sitting on the Iron Throne in King's Landing, and her name was Daenerys Targaryen. So what did Bran do to influence the events in King's Landing and clear his path to the throne? He instructed Sam to reveal Jon's true heritage to him, the spark that ignited everything else. This seems like a small thing, an act of honesty, just giving Jon information he deserved to know, but Bran understood exactly what chain reaction this would set off. Jon told Daenerys, and their relationship immediately began to fracture. The woman he loved was also his aunt, which complicated things emotionally. But more importantly, Jon had a better claim to the throne than she did, which Daenerys perceived as a threat. Then Jon told Sansa and Arya, despite promising Daenerys he would keep it secret. Sansa told Tyrion, Tyrion told Varys. This single piece of information spread throughout the political networks of Westeros like wildfire, and each person who learned it responded in predictable ways. For Daenerys, it fed into her worst fears. She'd spent her entire life believing she was special, that she had a unique destiny to reclaim the Iron Throne for House Targaryen. Now she discovered there was someone else with an even better claim, and that person was more beloved by the Westerosi people, had more natural allies, and didn't have to convince anyone he belonged there. This revelation fractured Jon and Daenerys' relationship, and fed Daenerys' growing paranoia about betrayal. Everyone she trusted, Jon, Tyrion, Varys, seemed to be working against her, keeping secrets, questioning her decisions. It became a critical factor, though not the only one, in her eventual decision to burn King's Landing. The timing of this revelation is crucial. Before Jon's parentage became public knowledge, Daenerys held a strong position and was following her advisor's counsel to avoid civilian casualties. She was being the queen she'd always wanted to be, just and merciful. After the revelation, everything changed. She felt alone, betrayed, unloved, and people who feel that way make very different decisions than people who feel secure and supported. And consider Bran's role in the Godswood when Jon told his sisters. This is a scene that's easy to overlook, but it reveals Bran's subtle manipulation perfectly. His statement, "It's your choice," seemed neutral on the surface. He wasn't telling Jon what to do, he was leaving it up to him. But knowing the context, it was anything but neutral. After Jon revealed he wasn't actually their half-brother, Bran's comment clearly signaled to Sansa that Jon was hiding something important about his identity, and that Bran knew what it was. The subtext was obvious. If Jon trusted Bran with the secret, why not his sisters? Why was Bran allowed to know but they weren't? Were they not family? Bran was lightly pressuring Jon into disclosure, making Jon feel like keeping the secret from Sansa and Arya would be a betrayal of their bond. It's psychological manipulation of the finest kind, creating a situation where Jon feels he has a free choice, but the framing of that choice heavily influences which option he'll pick. And Bran knew exactly how Sansa would respond once she learned the truth. He knew she would see Jon as a potential alternative to Daenerys, someone who could rule without burning cities. He knew she would tell others. The whole chain of events was predictable once set in motion, and Bran set it in motion. The Jaime Lannister variable. Then there's Jaime Lannister, another fascinating piece in Bran's chess game. Bran's intervention here reveals just how far ahead he was thinking. Jaime arrived at Winterfell to fight against the dead, but his presence was controversial to say the least. This was the man who'd pushed Bran from a tower window, crippling him for life. This was the Kingslayer, the man who'd broken his most sacred oath. This was a Lannister, and the North had plenty of reasons to hate Lannisters. Bran's intervention was fascinating. He welcomed Jaime to Winterfell publicly, ensuring everyone noticed his arrival and triggering an immediate trial. Jaime's fate hung in the balance. Would he be executed for his crimes, imprisoned, sent away? Then Bran made a crucial choice. He didn't reveal that Jaime had pushed him from that tower window in season 1. Everyone knew Jaime was the Kingslayer, but nobody except Bran and Jaime knew about the attempted murder of a child. If Bran had revealed this, Jaime would almost certainly have been executed. The North would have demanded it. Even Daenerys, who had vouched for Jaime, wouldn't have been able to save him. But Bran stayed silent. This non-intervention likely saved Jaime's life. But why? What possible reason could Bran have for protecting the man who crippled him? It wasn't about the battle against the dead. Jaime fought well against the Whites and every sword mattered in that fight, but he wasn't pivotal to defeating the Night King. Hundreds of people fought in that battle, and while Jaime's contribution was valuable, it wasn't irreplaceable. Bran could have let him die and still defeated the Night King. No, Jaime's real importance came later, in a way that nobody could have predicted. When Daenerys' forces captured Jaime after the battle, as he tried to return to Cersei, it became the breaking point for Tyrion. Tyrion had been wavering in his loyalty to Daenerys for a while, watching her become more ruthless and unstable. But Jaime's capture was personal. This was his brother, the person who'd protected him throughout his life, despite Tyrion being an embarrassment to House Lannister. That's when Tyrion finally turned against Daenerys and freed his brother. He committed treason to save Jaime's life. This act landed Tyrion in prison, and that imprisonment became crucial to everything that followed. Because it was in that cell, sitting alone with his thoughts and his guilt, that Tyrion accomplished two absolutely crucial things that would reshape Westeros. First, he convinced Jon to kill Daenerys. That lengthy conversation in Jon's cell exploited Jon's love for his sisters, persuading him that Daenerys' death was the only way to protect them. Tyrion painted the picture of what the world would look like under Daenerys' rule. Endless war, cities burned, and anyone who disagreed with her labeled a tyrant and destroyed. He reminded Jon of what Daenerys had become, the people she'd killed, the mercy she'd abandoned. And it worked. Jon, who loved Daenerys, who had bent the knee to her, who had fought for her, decided she had to die. Without Tyrion's persuasion, Jon might never have made that choice. He was loyal to a fault, and his love for Daenerys was genuine. But Tyrion knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. Second, Tyrion spent his imprisonment thinking deeply about the future of the realm, ultimately concluding that Bran should be king. He had time to reflect on everything that had happened, all the mistakes he'd made, all the rulers he'd served, and he came to a conclusion about what kind of person would sit on the Iron Throne. Now, the Tyrion strategy. But wait, Bran hadn't seen Tyrion in months by the Great Council. He didn't say a word before Tyrion launched into his nomination speech. How could he have possibly influenced Tyrion's decision? Let's revisit two critical but often overlooked conversations Bran had with Tyrion at Winterfell. The first one. Bran told Tyrion his entire story. It's interesting that no one else seemed to ask Bran about his transformation into the Three-Eyed Raven, at least not on screen. In retrospect, the showrunners were probably directing our attention to this specific moment. Tyrion had concluded that their new ruler would need a compelling narrative for propaganda purposes, so Bran ensured his story was fresh in Tyrion's mind while Tyrion pondered the kingdom's future. The second conversation is even more telling. Tyrion suggested Bran should become Lord of Winterfell, a position of significant power. Bran's response, he said he didn't want it, because he doesn't want anything anymore. This seemingly throwaway comment was actually very crucial. Tyrion gradually came to believe that the ideal ruler was someone who didn't desire power. Varys had told Tyrion exactly this while trying to switch his allegiance to Jon. After Varys' execution, Tyrion admitted, rather miserably, that Varys had been right all along. Tyrion couldn't nominate Jon after he'd killed Daenerys, that's too controversial, but he knew one other person who apparently had no desire to rule and therefore would make an excellent ruler: Bran. The Three-Eyed Raven selected Bran to become his successor because of who Bran was, specifically his position in Westerosi society and the political possibilities his identity created. Think about what actually happened to Bran Stark the child. He was lured to Bloodraven's cave under false pretenses, promised the possibility of walking again through magical means. Jojen Reed's visions showed him the Three-Eyed Raven, suggested there was hope, implied that Bran's journey north had a purpose that would benefit him personally. But that was never the plan. Bran was never going to walk again. That was a lie, or at least a misdirection. What actually happened was that he was taught magic and trained in greensight without being informed it would consume his identity. That Bran Stark would be absorbed into a greater collective consciousness and essentially cease to exist as a normal individual. Imagine being Bran in those moments when he first started to realize what was happening to him. The gradual realization that the more he connected with the Weirwood network, the more of himself he lost. The memories, the experiences, the identity of Bran Stark being diluted by thousands of other memories and experiences until he couldn't tell where he ended and the network began. Mira Reed was absolutely right when she confronted him about it. She had sacrificed everything, her brother's life, her own safety, years of her youth, to protect Bran and get him to the Three-Eyed Raven, and the boy she'd protected no longer existed. Brandon Stark, the person she'd cared about and fought for, had died in that cave. What came out was wearing his face, but wasn't him. It's actually quite tragic when you think about it that way. Bran didn't choose this fate knowing what it would cost. He was a child who wanted to be useful, who wanted to matter, who wanted to find a purpose after losing his ability to walk and becoming a broken thing in a world that valued physical prowess. The Three-Eyed Raven exploited that vulnerability and used Bran as a vessel. But why Bran specifically? There had been other Green Seers throughout history, other potential candidates, but why was Bran Stark chosen for this role? Even without Tyrion's intervention, Bran was one of the very few people in the Dragon Pit who could realistically become king. He was Ned Stark's eldest surviving son, and therefore the technical heir to Winterfell. Looking at the other lords paramount, the options were remarkably limited. Gendry openly admitted he didn't know how to be a lord, much less a king. The Prince of Dorne had only just assumed his title. Nobody was going to follow Robin Arryn or Idmir Tully. The Three-Eyed Raven didn't choose Bran centuries ago simply because he had a potential as a Greenseer. He chose him because Bran was one of the few people who could believably become king once this entire saga reached its conclusion. All that remained was manipulating Tyrion into delivering that fateful speech, which we witnessed. So, the ultimate victor. The Three-Eyed Raven selected Bran to become king all the way back in season 1, when Jaime pushed him from that tower window. We just didn't realize it at that time. Bran Stark didn't win the Game of Thrones, the three-eyed raven did. And just like that, we reached the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and turn the notification bell on so you don't miss out on new upcoming videos. Let me know in the comments what you think of Bran becoming king, and see you in the next one.